Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I managed to stay out of the broiling heat for a good part of the weekend. That didn't. What happens to me when the weather gets really hot, if I'm out in it for a while, they always say, well, there's a reason you should wear a hat. But when it just beats down on me afterward, I am just, for a couple of days, I am just worn out. So I managed to go to the car show in City Park a couple of times over the weekend, but I went both times early in the morning when it was not even 70 degrees out. It was just an opportunity to get out and do some things. But on both days over the weekend afternoon, I did not go outdoors. I know there are some people that don't have that luxury, but I found other things to keep me busy. First of all, welcome to this week. It's going to be an abbreviated week for a great many of us. There is a Glenn Beck special that will air here on the radio station on Friday morning in place of me. And that, of course, is because Saturday is Independence Day. And since it's falling on the weekend, we get a company holiday on Friday. I know a lot of you people have the same thing, or some of you have Monday off next week. But either way, a lot of folks have a nice long 3-day weekend coming up. We're all looking forward to that as well. Some of the things we're going to be talking about on the program today, Randy Staples is coming up in a short while. He'll join us, spend a few minutes talking with us. Did you know, here's a shocker, sales of Confederate flags are skyrocketing. The lefties just simply can't figure out why, because they thought that everyone thinks just like they do and would be burning them and throwing them in the trash and burying them in landfills or wherever they go when you're done with them. Not happening. And I also wanted to open the show today talking a little bit. It's been a busy weekend. I was looking over some of the opinion pieces people were writing following. First of all, the Obamacare decision is going to have a lot more long-term lasting impact on most of us, especially on your wallets, your checkbooks, your purses, probably than this same-sex marriage decision will ever have. However, which one do you think got the most attention over the course of the weekend? Yeah. Now, there are people out there who say, well, this is just a distraction because Greece and Puerto Rico, they're in meltdown and stocks are overvalued and there are bubbles and the Chinese are cutting interest rates and we're just doing this so people don't pay any attention to that. Look, you may all have your narrow special interests, but all of these things are important. That's why we're talking about them. And some things are important culturally just simply because, well, they enshrine a shift that has been taking place for a very, very long time. But you may remember, we've talked, those of us who warned about a same-sex marriage law going back 10, 15, 20 years ago, used to say, well, it's a slippery slope. If you have that, it won't be long until you have marriage. People will be looking to marry, brothers and sisters would like to marry, and you'll have people looking to have two spouses, two women and one man, or three men and five women, and it'll just become completely out of control. And everyone said, no, 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 that's always the straw man argument. You people on the right, you're just mean, spiteful, and bigoted, and that's the reason you bring that up. So Politico, which is a very liberal publication, had this over the weekend. Some of you may have seen it. Those of you who actually follow me on Facebook would have seen it because I was very quick to post it after I happened to see it. The headline, it's time to legalize polygamy. Oh. But we were told, never mind what you were told. The writer says, now that we've defined that love and devotion and family isn't driven by gender alone, why should it be limited to just two individuals? The most natural advance next for marriage lies in legalized polygamy, yet many of the same people who pressed for marriage equality for gay couples oppose it. That's funny. Why do you oppose it? Because it's immoral. Oh, but you claim what you're doing because it's not. What we're doing is fine because it's what we're doing, but it's what you may do, that's wrong. The writer says the moral reasoning behind society's rejection of polygamy remains just as uncomfortable and legally weak as same-sex marriage opposition was until recently. You knew they were going to start doing this, and a friend, in fact, in Texas told me over the weekend there was already a lawsuit there. The Muslim immigrants to that state are suing the state of Texas because they want their style of marriage approved, and that means polygamous relationships, although it's a one-way street. A woman in the Islamic faith, she has no rights, so she cannot have several husbands, but a man can have several because, well, once you've tossed acid on the first two, you need a couple of more. Couple and a spare, if you will. Polygamy, or polyamory, what the writer is writing, is a fact. People are living in group relationships today. That's true. The question is not whether they will continue on in those relationships. The question is whether we will grant to them the same basic recognition we grant to other adults that love makes marriage, and that the right to marry is exactly that, a right. Why the opposition from those who have no interest in preserving traditional marriage or forbidding polyamorous relationships? The writer says, I think the answer has to do with political momentum, with a kind of ad hoc rejection of polygamy as necessary political concession, and in time, I think that will change. Well, especially when they bring the full weight of the media to bear on all of this. And let's be honest, the media, entertainment and news media, along with the fellow travelers in academia, were the ones who worked very hard in the public relations effort over the last 25 years to bring us same-sex marriage. So now someone is going to go into the halls of academia and say, wow, we can't get in the way of this. If people want to marry a horse, a cow, or pig, I mean, that's their right. And if they love the pig, well, go right ahead. And then they'll get the echo chamber going on campus. And then the folks in Hollywood, well, if Johnny Depp likes it, then I'm for it too. And with that, then the journalists will go, well, gee, Johnny Depp is cool. Gosh, I'd like to have his babies. The men will even say that, and then they'll start promoting all of these other alternatives when it comes to lifestyles. 8:13, and yes, and this time we would say it is a lifestyle choice. No one will be arguing, God made me that way. In other words, God made you to desire a horse or 16 wives? Yes. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you can reach me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com by email, and our telephone number is 736-0300. Over at Time Magazine, there is a writer by the name of Rod Dreher, and he writes that the American conservative, Orthodox Christians, he says, must now learn to live as exiles in our own country. He's not talking about Eastern Orthodoxy. He's just talking about the very traditional Christians who take their faith very seriously and the meaning of it. You know, they're not cafeteria-style Christians. And he writes, is it hard to overstate the significance of the decision and the seriousness of the challenge it presents to us? Voting Republican and other failed culture war strategies are not going to save us now. And I'm flipping over to page 3 on this because this guy seems to have been thinking about this and spending a lot of time, and he's got a good mind. We have to accept that we really are living in a culturally post-Christian nation, he writes. To be frank, the court majority may impose on the rest of the nation a view widely shared by elites, but it is also a view shared now by a majority of Americans. And then this paragraph. For another, LGBT activists and their fellow travelers really will be coming after social conservatives. The Supreme Court has now, in constitutional doctrine, said that homosexuality is equivalent to race. The next goal of activists will be a long-term campaign to remove tax-exempt status from dissenting religious institutions. The more immediate goal will be the shunning and persecution of dissenters within civil society. Well, now they're talking about shaming gun owners, they're talking about shaming Confederate flag owners, and they'll be shaming Christians. They won't shame the Muslims, though. They'll get a free pass because, from media and academia's perspective, they are protected a minority. So that won't happen right away. Although when their numbers grow to the point where they'll have some influence on this, and then did you see on the Blaze over the weekend? ISIS has all of these new. You want to talk about sadistic treatment? They have all of these new forms of executing people. They put them in a cage, not burning them any longer, but they put a camera on the cage so when they put them in a pool, they can watch them drown, and apparently they enjoy this. Or they tie a bunch of guys up into a car, and then they hit the car with an RPG and rocket-propelled grenade and blow it up and blow everybody inside to smithereens or burn them to death. Good Islamic fun, I guess you would say. So, in this country, opposition to same-sex marriage pretty much is done for, publicly anyway. You may have heard about a newspaper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania over the weekend saying it was not going to any longer publish letters about people who object and who claim that it is wrong and that it is morally wrong. One of those editors, his name is Misick. The first 4 letters of his name spell mice. He appeared on Fox and Friends yesterday morning with Tucker Carlson. Take a listen to this exchange. The editor says, no, we're not in any way trying to silence dissent.
No, not at all. What we were trying to do, and perhaps we missed a little bit in the execution, was to try to create a space for civil discussion in the pages of Penn Live while allowing reasoned and intelligent debate on the issue.
And being the smartest people in the room, we know what the reasoned and intelligent debate are, and the rest of you don't, because clearly you're Christians, and that means, you believe in, flying saucers too, and, you think there's a little man up in the sky, and and that a guy walked around and performed miracles. And we simply all know, those of us who are enlightened newspaper editors know, that sort of thing would never happen. Well, Carlson is getting a little bit confused by some of the arguments this guy is making about what is reasoned in civil discussion. And listen to this gibberish this guy comes up with under questioning from Tucker Carlson.
You're a writer, you write for a living, you use language in your job. Why wouldn't you have just said that?
Actually, I did. The second half of what you're referring to was a tweet I had, on a discussion I had on Twitter later in the day on Friday. The first half of it was correct. That was the statement that originally ran on Penn Live. It's been moderated some since, and in fact, it's been moderated even further on our Sunday opinion page today.
If you look at my tweeter and my pooter and my fluter, then you'll understand exactly what we're talking about, none of which I happen to bring along with me, though, today. It's gibberish. It's this guy's a newspaper editor. What in blazes? Well, he goes on to say, this is the smartest guy in the room under questioning from Tucker Carlson. And obviously he's probably thinking, I'm here at the evil Fox News. I'm going to show them. And now that he's been bested by a guy like Tucker Carlson, who used to walk around in a bow tie for crying out loud, I'm sure that it's all going to be Fox News' fault, and it simply wouldn't be that this guy is incompetent. But listen to the smartest guy in the room flailing.
You believed it was an advancement for civil rights, and that people who disagree are by definition illegitimate. And you said this is settled law. I wonder if you took that same position when the Supreme Court handed down its Heller decision on the Second Amendment, enshrining the Second Amendment as an individual right. Did you at that point say anybody who disagrees with the Heller decision can't appear on my pages?
I didn't have the job back then, so I can't speak to it.
I wonder, as you look at newspaper editorial pages and the declining readership of them, and it's declined pretty dramatically, people, when you ask them, why don't you read editorial pages, they say, well, because the people who run them are elitist, they don't have respect for me, they have contempt for me if they disagree. Haven't you given them evidence that that's true?
I have a great many friends across the political spectrum.
Yes. Some of them are even straight, unlike most newspaper editors. Did you hear questioning about the Heller decision? Do you remember what that was? Second Amendment. That was a Supreme Court decision, and it basically said that Washington, D.C., and a lot of these other liberally run cities where they had gun control, yet there was gun violence in the country, that they couldn't deny people their Second Amendment rights. And so the question is, well, wait a second. If you can decide who can argue, because the argument from this editor at this newspaper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, what he's telling us is, well, look, the Supreme Court made its decision, and therefore you've got to shut up now. You can't make an argument because, gay is good, and if you're opposed, that's bad. That's what he's telling you. But on the other hand, the question from Tucker is, well, wait a second. The Supreme Court decided in favor of the Second Amendment. Would you then allow, because liberals got to spout off all they wanted to about that, and they still are. And the guy says, I wasn't working here at the time. You want to talk about a political answer? He ought to be running for office. Get out of the journalism business altogether. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, 75. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. A reminder that we still have tickets available for this upcoming Patriots Night, which is Thursday, at the Performing Arts Center at the College of Southern Idaho right here in Twin Falls. And so there are tickets available for some veterans or active duty servicemen and women through the donations that have been made available. In other words, these are for you. I mean, these are a gift. And you can call Anna Workman at this telephone number, and I'll give this out if I get a chance a little later in the program as well. Of course, same area code, it's Idaho. 436-4149. Once more, that number, 436-4149. Remember, Miss Idaho will be the mistress of ceremonies, and you'll also get to hear a great patriotic band in Madison Rising. And then they are on their way to Las Vegas, and then this summer they are doing a tour of Marine Corps bases in Asia. So one of the most popular bands now, probably anywhere in the world. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online, which means you can listen to us anywhere, all over the world. A friend of mine is doing that this morning. He just sent me some photographs. He was in the Deep South, and he picked up some flags that are not politically correct. And he has a Pledge of Allegiance signed by Red Skelton. That's cool. There was an American patriot. Wednesday morning, we've got someone coming in from, of course, Trip Family Medicine. We'd like to remind you, you can join us right here on the program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, and you have a medical professional you can give a telephone call to if you have a serious question or two about your health, or you just have you're curious about something, or you know someone who might need a bit of an assist somewhere. And of course, we've been talking lately about sleep issues and heat issues. We may be back to heat issues this week, at least at some point with some of the callers, because it is a little hot out there. Some record temperatures were set in a few places around the region on Saturday. I don't know yet about Sunday, but we must have been close in a few spots. So that's coming up this Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We call it Better Health with Trip Family Medicine. They're located in Twin Falls on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. And I've been telling you, the hotter it gets, you want to keep it cool in the house. I know this because I've had the AC going, but my computer desk is over near a window, and I have the window there and a brick wall on the outside. I can literally, when it gets really hot, I can feel that radiating through. Well, one way to control some of that would be window tints. Whether it be your office, your business, your home, your car, call Tint Lady, because they can put these tints in and they can cut heat down by 72%, which means that air conditioner won't run quite so much, which means you'll save on electricity, which means you can spend the money on vacation or something else, or maybe even a cool drink. We're not going to recommend alcohol on a hot day, not a good idea. So maybe a good glass of ice water with a little lemon in it. That would do it. So they want to let you know they'll do free estimates. Give them a call because they'll come out, they'll take a look, and they'll be able to tell you what it's going to cost. The telephone number is 736-8469, also online, tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated, they've been doing this for more than 2 decades. Located at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Open today, in fact, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Saturdays by appointment only, closed Sundays. And by the way, don't squint, get tint. We were talking a little earlier about this decision from the Supreme Court of the United States, and it doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for religious conservatives in this country any longer, because they're now worried someone's going to come into their churches and demand, you've got to marry me. The Supreme Court says yes. Well, Anthony Kennedy, and he was the swing vote on that ruling we heard on Friday. Of course, it was done probably a couple of months ago. He said, we will try and give religious protections to churches. He said, we can't deny that. In other words, your First Amendment, freedom of religion, trumps some homosexuals' right to marry, is what Kennedy said, even though Kennedy found a right to marry. Well, this is going to be litigated for many, many years to come. So many in the Republican Party, especially those running for president, are saying we need some protections outlined beyond the First Amendment to clarify that you cannot go into a church and demand that the pastor, the minister, or the priest marry you. This is Bobby Jindal, the Roman Catholic governor of Louisiana, and a candidate for the Republican nomination for president.
I think the left is now going to go after our First Amendment rights. I think it is wrong for the federal government to force Christian individuals, businesses, pastors, churches to participate in wedding ceremonies that violate our sincerely held religious beliefs. We have to stand up and fight for religious liberty. That's where this fight is going. The left wants to silence us. Hillary Clinton wants to silence us. We're not going away.
Bring them out so we may know them. It's 8:28. Bill Colley with you. Randy Staples is coming up in just a little under 15 minutes on the program from Idaho Weekly Briefing, and he joins us on Monday mornings to talk about things going on around the state of Idaho. He has a great opening segment today in Idaho Weekly Briefing where he mentions we had all of this big news from Washington last week, which has really just obliterated anything else in the news cycle. And yet, on the state level, you've got some very interesting stories developing. In fact, speaking of a lot of those radical liberal academics, some of them may be paying way too much for land they're looking at for expansion. And questions are being raised, is that because friends are getting some benefits by having their property purchased at well above market value? Randy's going to talk a little bit about that with us. I have some other things we'll touch base with him on. We may not get to it today. I hope to before the end of the program. And we may not talk too much about it with Randy, but there was a story the other day in the Wall Street Journal, and some of the Indian tribes who occupy a land still in Idaho, but also Montana, may be winning one of the largest water rights battles in the history of the United States in Helena, Montana. But it's going to have a huge impact along the Idaho state line. We get a chance, we'll talk about that a little later in the show, too, as well. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. 76, 830, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I just looking at looking at the story about what happened in New York. They caught, of course, the second fugitive. Did you know that the Supreme Court this morning has ruled that lethal injection is not cruel and unusual punishment? That is, you can go ahead and still give these guys. At least in New York, they've already gotten rid of one of these guys. I guess it was capital punishment delayed or deferred. Second one is actually in critical condition. Here's the thing, though. There are threats, according to the government. You know, they want to do more domestic spying to protect us, but there are threats, according to the government, from terrorists coming up this Independence Day weekend. And yet this same government can't find two guys running around in the woods for 3 weeks. And these guys were half-wits. I mean, it's not... they're breaking into cabins, drinking gin, and, you know, snoozing for a while, and then they go on down the road and break into another cabin with all this high-tech gadgetry on the helicopters where you can pick people up with sensors. Couldn't find him for 3 weeks. The guy that was killed on Friday, you know how they actually narrowed it down? They heard somebody cough. So they followed the coughing and then shot him dead. All the high-tech gadgetry in their ears were what just typical old senses. We were talking earlier about government and the need to perhaps find ways to ensure that people, dissenters especially in this country, are not subject to the tyranny of the majority, which used to be the minority, but the majority now. Happened to see a couple of things over the weekend, and a friend of mine actually was commenting about this, and I said, you know what? There's two distinct viewpoints going on here. I want to share this with you quickly if I could. And I'm going to read from one, and then I'm going to read from number two, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit of a surprise. 75, Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 8:35. On top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. I'm blocking my camera here, by the way. NewsRadio1310.com as well, of course, online. And that means you can hear us anywhere all over the world by hitting that Listen Live button. So I came across this blog post over the weekend. And the writer says there is a Republican Party. There is no conservative party. The purpose of the party and its politicians, much like that of its Democrat counterpart, is to obtain money and privileges for its major donors. That doesn't mean that its members don't have other ideals and agendas, but Republican politicians who rise high enough come from an urban and suburban establishment that is more liberal than the base. Expecting them to care as much about your issues as you do is unrealistic. They will only do the right thing insofar as it helps them. Think free trade, and free trade that may have given up our sovereignty. Number one, get control of money. Number two, advance their careers. Number three, become popular. He's got some more that he says. That's one post. Here's a second post. This is actually a guest editorial opinion piece in Time magazine. The writer says the army of lobbyists that started relatively small in the mid-20th century has now grown to big battalions of law firms and lobbying firms of the right, left, and an amalgam of both. And that gargantuan, if not reptilian, industry now takes on board former members of the House and Senate and their personal and committee staffs, and they are all getting fabulously rich. Both the Republicans and the Democrats, the governors' associations of those parties, form social welfare organizations composed of wealthy interests and corporate executives to raise money for their respective parties in exchange for close personal access to individual governors who almost surely could render executive decisions favorable to the corporate interests. There is little wonder, the writer says, that Americans of the right and many in the middle are apoplectic, that means angry, of course, for you public school grads, at their government and absolutely and rightly convinced that the game of government is rigged in favor of the elite and powerful. Now, I shared both of these. They're almost identical in their assessment. That government no longer works for you. People in government work simply for themselves, and who has the largest satchel of campaign contributions. In other words, legalized bribery. The first one is written by a guy by the name of Daniel Greenfield. He's an arch-conservative. He has a blog called the Sultan Kanish blog, very popular in right-wing circles. The second person is Gary Hart, who once worked for George McGovern's, you remember very liberal George McGovern in 1972, worked for his presidential campaign and then later served as a very liberal member of the U.S. Senate, and in fact himself on a couple of occasions was a presidential candidate. So, you've got an extremist on the right who is saying, hey, we got a problem with this. And then over here you've got an extremist on the left saying, hey, we've got a problem with this. And they're both saying the same thing. What should that tell us about the direction that this country happens to be going? If we get to it today, I'd like to share with you, and it's only going to get worse. I'd like to share with you some of that long-term economic news. As they say, the markets are roiling today. Yes, roiling and boiling, and all due to all of the olive oil shipped in from Greece. Greece, and there are problems elsewhere around the world today that we're learning about. And you have some of the leading investors in the country saying that we have some bubbles that have developed. China has been cutting its interest rates. The Chinese have been selling stocks on margin, which is, of course, one of the big causes of the Great Depression. People, when they had their margins called or the margin calls came in, they couldn't afford to pay those. So I just, and now you've got government that's like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, is that campaign cash? Or are you just glad to see me? Yes, and then they come to you and say, yeah, if you elect me, I'll fight for you. Well, after I fight for myself. And the rich guy over here who's buying all of my campaign commercials for me. But I'm, as you know, see this? Here's a picture of Ronald Reagan. I'm a conservative too. See? Says here I'm a Republican. I'm just like you. And over on the other side, hey, you vote for me. We'll make sure somebody else pays for your health care. Yeah, because here's a picture of Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah, see, I'm a Democrat too. Hey, Randy Staples on the way on top story this morning.